The morning mist clung to the pine trees like smoke as the sound echoed across the valley. One shot, clean, final. At 500 meters, the target shattered completely. The silence that followed wasn't just surprise. It was the sound of assumptions crumbling. In the distance, a woman with graying hair adjusted her grip on a walking cane and quietly walked away from the firing line, leaving behind a group of elite rangers who would never look at anyone the same way again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30 a.m., but Mary Ann Thompson was already awake. She had been for 20 minutes, lying still in the narrow bed of her cabin, listening to the forest come alive outside her window. The sounds were familiar, the rustle of deer moving through underbrush, the distant call of a loon on the lake, the soft whisper of wind through towering pines. These sounds had been her companions for the past 3 years, ever since she'd taken the job as equipment coordinator at the Cascade Mountain Ranger Training Facility. The wooden floor was cold against her bare feet as she rose, reaching automatically for the walking cane that leaned against her knitstand. The cane was unremarkable polished oak with a simple curved handle, worn smooth from daily use. A casual observer might assume it was purely functional, a necessity born from some old injury or advancing age. They would be only partially right. Mary Ann, dressed in the same practical clothes she wore every day, sturdy canvas pants, a faded flannel shirt that had once belonged to her father, and boots that had walked countless miles across terrain that would challenge men half her age. At 52, her hair had turned silver at the temples, but her hands remained steady, her posture straight despite the cane she carried. The mirror reflected tired eyes that had seen too much, but also a quiet determination that had never wavered. Cabin sat at the edge of the facility grounds, separated from the main complex by a quarter-mile of forest trail. It had been offered to her as a quiet place to live, away from the constant activity of the training center. What the administrators didn't realize was that this isolation suited her perfectly. It allowed her to maintain the careful distance she had cultivated since arriving here, the protective space between who she had been and who she needed to be now. The walk to the main facility took 15 minutes, following a well-worn path that wound between massive Douglas firs and western red cedars. Mary Ann moved at her own pace, the cane tapping softly against packed earth and scattered pine needles. To anyone watching, she would appear to be a middle-aged woman making her way carefully through the forest, perhaps struggling slightly with mobility issues. They would see the deliberate steps, the way she tested the ground before putting her full weight down, the careful navigation around roots and rocks. What they wouldn't see was the acute awareness in every movement, the way her eyes constantly scanned the forest, cataloging sounds and shadows. They wouldn't notice how her free hand instinctively knew the exact distance to her hip, where a sidearm had once rested. They wouldn't recognize the practiced efficiency in her gait that spoke of decades spent moving through hostile terrain where a single misstep could mean death. The Cascade Mountain facility sprawled across 200 acres of pristine Oregon wilderness, its buildings constructed from local timber and stone to blend seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. It served as one of the premier training centers for federal park rangers, Forest Service personnel, and specialized law enforcement units that operated in remote wilderness areas. The facility boasted state-of-the-art equipment, challenging terrain for field exercises, and instructors who were considered among the best in their fields. Mary Ann's role was officially listed as equipment coordinator, a position that involved managing the vast inventory of gear used in training exercises. Firearms, climbing equipment, survival supplies, communication devices, specialized vehicles, all of it passed through her hands at some point. It was a job that required attention to detail, organizational skills, and the ability to work independently. It was also a job that kept her largely invisible to the trainees and instructors who cycled through the facility. The equipment building stood at the heart of the complex, a utilitarian structure that housed everything from basic camping supplies to advanced tactical gear. Marianne unlocked the heavy doors as the first light of dawn began to filter through the canopy above. Inside, rows of metal shelving stretched toward the ceiling, each section meticulously organized and labeled. Rifles rested in secure racks, their serial numbers logged and accounted for. Boxes of ammunition were sorted by caliber and purpose. Scopes, bipods, and other accessories had their designated places. She moved through the space with practiced efficiency, checking inventory sheets against physical counts, noting items that needed replacement or repair. The work was methodical, requiring concentration but leaving room for her mind to wander. Often, she found herself remembering other storage facilities, other weapons, other times when the gear she maintained had meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The first trainees began arriving around 6 a.m. Their voices carrying across the grounds as they assembled for morning briefings. From her position inside the equipment building, Marianne could hear the cadence of military-style formations, the sharp bark of instructors issuing orders, the rhythmic sound of boots on pavement. These sounds, too, were familiar, though they belonged to a different chapter of her life. By 7 a.m., the first requests for equipment began arriving. A group of new recruits needed basic camping gear for a 3-day wilderness survival exercise. Marianne pulled sleeping bags, backpacks, water purification tablets, and emergency beacons from their designated locations, checking each item against a detailed list. The recruits who came to collect the gear were young, eager, their faces bright with the excitement of new challenges. They thanked her politely but briefly, their minds already focused on the adventures ahead. To them, she was simply the woman who managed their equipment, helpful but unremarkable, part of the facility's infrastructure rather than its heart. They saw her methodical approach to her work, the way she double-checked every item before releasing it, the careful records she maintained. What they didn't see was the way she instinctively assessed each piece of equipment, not just for functionality but for reliability under extreme stress. The way her fingers automatically checked rifle actions and scope mounts with the precision of someone who had depended on such details for survival. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm. Advanced tactical teams requisitioned specialized communications equipment for extended operations. Wilderness medicine trainees collected first aid supplies for emergency response scenarios. Firearms instructors signed out weapons and ammunition for marksmanship training. Each transaction was logged with meticulous care, each piece of equipment tracked from issue to return. Around 10 a.m., a new group arrived that caught Marianne's attention despite her practiced invisibility. They were older than the typical recruits, their movements carrying the confidence of experienced professionals. Their instructor, a man named Sergeant Davis, introduced them as elite park rangers from various western states, brought together for advanced tactical training. These were the specialists called in when situations exceeded the capabilities of regular personnel: wilderness rescues in extreme conditions, enforcement actions against armed poachers, counter-drug operations in remote areas. "We'll need the full tactical package," Davis told Marianne as he reviewed the equipment list. Long-range precision rifles, advanced optics, night vision, the works. "These folks are here for the real deal." Marianne nodded and began gathering the requested items. The rifles were top-of-the-line precision instruments, each worth more than many people's annual salaries. She handled them with respectful efficiency, checking each weapon's condition, verifying the serial numbers against her records, ensuring that the accompanying optics were properly mounted and zeroed. As she worked, she was aware of the Rangers watching her. Their glances were professional but dismissive, the way experienced operators looked at support personnel, acknowledging their necessity while maintaining a clear distinction between those who did and those who enabled. She heard fragments of their conversation, discussions of previous operations, comparisons of equipment preferences, casual boasts about shooting abilities. 500 meters, standing position, no problem, one of them was saying. That's what separates us from the weekend warriors. Hell, I can manage that shot in my sleep, another replied. The key is reading the wind conditions properly. The conversation continued as Marianne completed the equipment checkout, each ranger signing for their assigned weapons and gear. They were clearly competent professionals, confident in their abilities and comfortable with the high-end equipment they would be using. Their confidence was earned through experience and training, built through countless hours on shooting ranges and in field conditions. As the group prepared to leave for their first training session, Marianne overheard Sergeant Davis briefing them on the day's schedule. They would begin with equipment familiarization, followed by precision shooting exercises at various distances. The culminating challenge would be long-range shooting at 500 meters, considered the gold standard for tactical marksmanship in wilderness environments. This isn't about hunting, Davis explained. At that distance, in field conditions, you need to account for wind, elevation, temperature, humidity. Miss by an inch, and you've failed the mission. These shots matter when someone's life is on the line. The Rangers nodded seriously, their earlier bravado tempered by the recognition of the challenge ahead. 500 meters was a significant distance, especially when shooting at human-sized targets in variable outdoor conditions. It required not just accuracy, but a deep understanding of ballistics, environmental factors, and the specific characteristics of the weapon being used. After the group departed, Marianne returned to her routine tasks, but part of her attention remained focused on the sounds drifting from the shooting ranges. She could hear the rhythmic crack of rifle fire, the occasional pause as shooters adjusted their positions or equipment, the called commands from instructors. These sounds stirred memories she usually kept carefully buried, echoes of other ranges, other challenges, other times when precision shooting had been more than an exercise. The lunch hour brought a brief lull in activity. Most of the trainees were gathered in the dining facility, sharing meals and swapping stories. Marianne ate alone in her office, a simple sandwich and thermos of coffee, while reviewing inventory reports and maintenance schedules. The quiet was welcome, a chance to reset before the afternoon's activities. Around 1 p.m., the tactical rangers returned to the equipment building. Their morning session had clearly been challenging. She could see the fatigue in their faces, the slight frustration that came from performing below expectations. They returned their rifles for cleaning and maintenance, each weapon showing signs of heavy use. Tougher than it looked out there, one of them admitted as he handed over his rifle. Wind was tricky, and the targets were smaller than I expected. 500 meters is no joke, another added. I was hitting center mass at 300, but that extra distance really changed the game. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marianne accepted each weapon without comment, beginning the methodical process of cleaning and inspection that would prepare them for the afternoon session. She worked with practiced efficiency, her movements economical and precise. Each rifle was disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled with the care of someone who understood that such attention to detail could mean the difference between success and failure in real-world situations. As she worked, she became aware that one of the rangers was watching her more intently than the others. His name tag read Mitchell, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent years in outdoor conditions. Unlike the others who seemed focused on their upcoming challenges, Mitchell appeared genuinely curious about her methodical approach to weapon maintenance. "You know your way around those rifles," he observed. Most equipment folks just log them in and out. Properly maintained equipment performs better, Marianne replied simply, not looking up from her work. These weapons need to function perfectly when it matters. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. You sound like you speak from experience. Marianne finished reassembling the rifle in her hands and set it carefully in the rack before meeting his gaze. All experience is valuable when applied properly, she said. It was a neutral response, neither confirming nor denying the implications of his observation. The afternoon session began with renewed determination from the tactical rangers. The morning's challenges had served as a reality check, tempering their initial confidence with a healthy respect for the difficulty of long-range precision shooting. Marianne could hear the increased intensity in their training, the longer pauses between shots as they took more time to read conditions and prepare each attempt. As the day wore on, the sounds from the range told a story of gradual improvement, mixed with ongoing frustration. Some shots found their marks, others missed by margins that would be acceptable in training, but unacceptable in real operations. The 500-meter distance remained a significant challenge, even for these experienced professionals. Evening brought the Rangers back to the equipment building one final time. Their faces showed the mixed satisfaction and exhaustion that came from a day of intense training. Some had met their goals, others were clearly disappointed with their performance. All showed the focused determination of professionals committed to improving their skills. Tomorrow's another day, Sergeant Davis told his group as they secured their equipment. Tonight, study your ballistics charts, think about what worked and what didn't. We'll tackle 500 meters again in the morning. As the last of the Rangers departed for the evening, Marianne began her end-of-day routine. Each weapon was inspected, cleaned if necessary, and secured in its designated location. Ammunition was counted and logged. Equipment was checked for damage or wear. The methodical process took nearly an hour, but it ensured that everything would be ready for the next day's training. The walk back to her cabin followed the same forest path she had taken that morning, but now the shadows were long and the air carried the cool promise of evening. The sounds of the forest were different two-day creatures, giving way to those that preferred darkness. The subtle shift in rhythm that marked the transition between day and night. Inside her cabin, Marianne prepared a simple dinner and settled into her single comfortable chair with a cup of tea. The day's events played through her mind, particularly the conversation with Mitchell and the sounds of the Rangers struggling with the 500-meter challenge. She thought about the confidence they had displayed that morning, the way it had been tempered by the reality of precision shooting at distance. In a small wooden box on her dresser, wrapped carefully in soft cloth, lay items from another life. A medal for marksmanship excellence, awarded after she had outshot every other sniper in her unit during a competition that had lasted 3 days. A letter of commendation from a commanding officer who had called her shooting skills extraordinary by any standard. A photograph of a younger woman in military fatigues, holding a rifle that had been her constant companion for 8 years of service. These mementos belonged to Staff Sergeant Marianne Thompson, who had served as a designated marksman with the 75th Ranger Regiment, who had completed tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, where precision shooting at distance had been a matter of survival rather than sport, who had earned a reputation among her peers as someone who never missed when it mattered most. That woman had carried the same steady hands, the same acute awareness, the same instinctive understanding of ballistics and environmental factors that guided Marianne's work at the facility. The injury that had ended her military career, a piece of shrapnel from an IED that had damaged nerves in her left leg, had taken away her ability to serve as a frontline soldier, but had left her skills intact. The walking cane was a reminder of physical limitations, but it was also a convenient explanation for the careful way she moved. The deliberate steps that others interpreted as caution born from injury rather than the ingrained habits of Someone trained to move silently through hostile territory. As she prepared for bed, Marianne could hear faint sounds from the main facility, the murmur of voices from the dining hall, the distant slam of doors, the everyday sounds of a training facility settling in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges for the tactical rangers, another opportunity to prove themselves at the demanding 500-meter distance. She had no intention of interfering with their training or revealing the skills she had spent 3 years keeping carefully hidden. Her role at the facility was to support others, not to compete with them. The life she had built here was quiet, peaceful, and safely removed from the intensity and pressure of her former career. But as she lay in the darkness, listening to the forest sounds outside her window, Marianne couldn't entirely suppress the part of her that remembered the satisfaction of a perfect shot. The moment when breath, heartbeat, and trigger squeeze aligned to send a bullet exactly where it needed to go. That knowledge remained as much a part of her as the steady hands that maintained equipment or the careful steps that navigated forest paths. Tomorrow would be another day of routine tasks, professional invisibility, and the comfortable anonymity she had cultivated since arriving at Cascade Mountain. The tactical rangers would continue their training, struggling with challenges that had once been second nature to her. And she would continue her work, supporting their efforts while keeping her own capabilities carefully hidden behind the unremarkable facade of a middle-aged woman with a walking cane. The alarm clock waited silently on her knitstand, ready to begin another cycle of carefully maintained normalcy. Outside, the forest settled into the deep quiet of night, broken only by the distant call of an owl and the soft whisper of wind through ancient trees. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the main parade ground as Captain Jake Harrison surveyed his domain. At 38, he commanded the Cascade Mountain facility with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the hierarchy of excellence. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing military straight, and his reputation as both an administrator and marksman was known throughout the Western training circuit. Harrison had built his career on precision, in leadership, in training protocols, and most notably, in his shooting abilities. His office walls displayed certificates from national competitions, photographs with high-ranking officials, and a glass case containing the rifle he had used to win the federal law enforcement precision shooting championship 3 years running. To Harrison, the facility wasn't just a training center. It was a showcase for the highest standards of professional excellence. The tactical rangers from the previous day's training had requested an additional session, and Harrison had decided to personally oversee their progress. It wasn't unusual for him to take direct interest in elite trainees, particularly when their performance reflected on the facility's reputation. Word traveled quickly in law enforcement circles, and a group of seasoned rangers struggling with basic marksmanship would raise uncomfortable questions. "Sergeant Davis," Harrison called as he approached the range complex, "how did yesterday's session conclude?" Davis straightened instinctively. Despite his own considerable experience, there was something about Harrison that demanded respect, not just his rank, but the easy confidence he projected. "Mixed results, sir. Some of our people are adapting well to the 500-meter challenge, but others are finding it more difficult than anticipated." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. He had observed hundreds of training sessions over the years, and he knew that even experienced operators could struggle when pushed beyond their normal parameters. The 500-meter shot was particularly unforgiving. It exposed every weakness in technique, equipment familiarity, and environmental awareness. "Perhaps a demonstration would be beneficial," Harrison suggested. "Sometimes seeing proper technique in action clarifies the principles better than any amount of instruction." The suggestion carried the weight of command despite its casual phrasing. Davis had worked with enough senior officers to recognize when a recommendation was actually an order. "That would be excellent, sir. The team would benefit from seeing advanced technique demonstrated." Word of the captain's planned demonstration spread quickly through the facility. Harrison's shooting abilities were legendary among the staff and regular trainees, but the visiting tactical rangers had not yet witnessed them firsthand. The prospect of watching acknowledged masterwork at the challenging 500-meter distance drew spectators beyond the immediate training group. By mid-morning, a considerable crowd had gathered at Range 7, the facility's premium long-distance shooting area. The range featured state-of-the-art target systems, wind measurement equipment, and observation platforms that allowed instructors and students to analyze every aspect of marksmanship technique. At 500 meters, the targets appeared as small dark silhouettes against the natural backdrop of the mountain slope. Harrison arrived carrying his personal rifle, a custom-built precision instrument worth more than most people's vehicles. Every component had been selected and tuned specifically for his shooting style. The stock was adjustable to precise measurements, the trigger had been refined to break at exactly 2 pounds, and the scope was a German-manufactured masterpiece that could resolve details at distances that challenged human vision. "Gather around," Harrison called to the assembled group. "Today we're going to explore what separates adequate marksmanship from true precision shooting." The tactical rangers formed a semicircle around him, their attention focused and professional. These were serious operators who understood the value of learning from acknowledged experts. Behind them, facility instructors and advanced trainees positioned themselves to observe techniques they had heard described, but rarely seen demonstrated at this level. "The 500-meter shot represents a threshold," Harrison continued, settling into his shooting position with practiced ease. "Below this distance, natural ability and basic training can often compensate for technical shortcomings. Beyond it, every element must be perfect: stance, breathing, trigger control, environmental reading, equipment setup." He adjusted the rifle's position on its bipod, his movements economical and precise. "Notice how I'm positioning my body in relation to the rifle. The weapon becomes an extension of your skeletal structure, not something you muscle into position." The crowd watched in respectful silence as Harrison worked through his pre-shot routine. He checked wind indicators, adjusted for the slight upward angle of the range, and made minute corrections to his scope settings. Each action was deliberate, backed by years of experience and thousands of previous shots at similar distances. "Environmental factors become critical at this range," he explained without taking his eye from the scope. "That flag at 300 meters shows wind from the left, but notice the vegetation movement at 400 meters suggests a slight shift. The shot will be in the air for over half a second, plenty of time for wind to affect trajectory." The rifle settled into perfect stillness as Harrison's breathing became controlled and rhythmic. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, understanding they were witnessing something exceptional. Even the most experienced among them rarely had the opportunity to observe true mastery demonstrated at this level. The shot cracked across the range with authority, the sound echoing off the mountainsides before fading into silence. Through the spotting scopes, observers could see the bullet's impact, a clean hit in the center of the target's vital zone. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd, though such accuracy was exactly what they had expected from Harrison. "Target, center mass," called the range officer, his voice carrying the satisfaction of confirming excellence. "Clean hit." At 500 meters, Harrison cycled the rifle's action smoothly, ejecting the spent case and chambering another round. "One shot proves nothing except that the rifle is properly zeroed," he said. "Consistency under varying conditions, that's the true measure of precision shooting ability." He fired 4 more shots in steady succession, each one finding the target center with mechanical precision. The grouping was tight enough to be covered by a man's palm, a demonstration of shooting that bordered on the supernatural for most observers. This wasn't just marksmanship. It was an art form practiced at the highest level. The tactical rangers exchanged glances, their expressions mixing admiration with the sobering recognition of how far their own skills fell short of this standard. Yesterday's struggles with the same distance took on a different perspective when viewed against Harrison's effortless demonstration. "Exceptional shooting, sir," Mitchell said, speaking for the group. "That's the kind of precision we're working toward." Harrison smiled as he began cleaning his rifle. "Achievable with proper training and equipment. The fundamentals remain the same regardless of distance. It's the margin for error that disappears as range increases." Dr. Sarah Coleman had been watching from the observation platform, her trained eye analyzing not just the shooting performance, but the dynamics of the group. As the facility's chief psychologist, she understood that confidence and capability were often as much about perception as actual skill. Harrison's demonstration had served multiple purposes, showcasing proper technique, while simultaneously establishing the standard that separated elite performers from merely competent ones. Coleman had worked with special operations personnel throughout her career, and she recognized the psychological impact of witnessing true expertise. Some of the Rangers showed renewed determination, energized by seeing what was possible. Others appeared slightly deflated, questioning their own abilities in light of such superior performance. "Impressive display," she said as Harrison packed his equipment, "though I suspect some of our visitors are wondering if they'll ever reach that level." "Doubt is useful when it motivates improvement," Harrison replied. "These are all experienced operators. They understand that excellence requires work." The morning's demonstration had established the facility's credibility and Harrison's personal reputation with the visiting Rangers. But it had also highlighted the gap between their current abilities and the standards expected of truly elite marksmen. The psychological impact would influence their training for the remainder of their stay. As the crowd dispersed, conversations buzzed with technical discussions about the shooting they had witnessed. Some debated the rifle specifications. Others analyzed Harrison's technique, and many expressed renewed determination to improve their own marksmanship skills. The demonstration had achieved its intended purpose, establishing clear standards while motivating serious effort. The tactical Rangers returned to their training with new intensity, but also with a sobering awareness of the challenges they faced. The 500-meter distance that had seemed difficult yesterday now appeared almost impossible after witnessing Harrison's seemingly effortless precision. Some adapted by breaking down his technique into learnable components. Others became overcautious, second-guessing instincts that had served them well at shorter distances. Richardson, the most senior of the visiting Rangers, found himself struggling with psychological obstacles that hadn't existed the day before. A 20-year veteran with an exemplary service record, he had never questioned his shooting abilities until watching Harrison's clinical precision. Now settling into position for his own attempt at the 500-meter target, he felt the weight of comparison. "Relax, Richardson," Sergeant Davis called from the observation position. "Focus on your own technique, not what you saw this morning." But the damage was already done. Richardson's first shot missed the target entirely, sailing high and right. His second attempt was closer, but still outside the acceptable zone. By his third shot, frustration was affecting his breathing, stance, and trigger control, the fundamental elements that Harrison had made appear effortless. The pattern repeated throughout the morning as other Rangers struggled with the psychological pressure of attempting to match or even approach the standard they had witnessed. What had been intended as motivation was proving, for some, to be counterproductive. The demonstration had been so far above their current level that it seemed unattainable rather than inspiring. Meanwhile, the facility's regular operations continued around the focused intensity of the tactical training. Administrative staff processed paperwork, maintenance crew serviced equipment, and other training groups worked through their own curricula. The hierarchy of the institution remained clear: elite demonstrations at the top, regular training in the middle, and support functions maintaining the foundation that made everything else possible. Marianne Thompson moved through this world, as she always did, nearly invisible in her practical clothes and steady pace. She delivered ammunition to Range 7, collected equipment that needed maintenance, and updated inventory records without drawing attention from the focused trainers and trainees. The walking cane marked her as someone outside the competitive sphere of marksmanship excellence, a support person rather than a participant. She had overheard discussions of Harrison's demonstration while restocking ammunition supplies. The descriptions were enthusiastic but not surprising. She had observed his shooting on previous occasions and recognized genuine skill when she saw it. Harrison was an excellent marksman by any reasonable standard, his technique solid and his equipment top quality. What interested her more was the psychological impact on the tactical rangers. She could see it in their posture, their conversation patterns, and their approach to their own training. Some had been inspired, but others were clearly struggling with self-doubt that hadn't existed before the demonstration. It was a common phenomenon she had observed many times in military training environments. The afternoon brought new challenges as the Rangers attempted to apply lessons learned from Harrison's demonstration. Some showed modest improvement, incorporating elements of his technique into their own shooting. Others continued to struggle, their performance actually declining as they overthought fundamentals that had previously been automatic. Davis found himself in the familiar position of trying to rebuild confidence that had been inadvertently damaged by exposure to superior performance. "Stop trying to shoot like Captain Harrison," he told Richardson during a particularly frustrating session. "You're not him, and your technique doesn't have to be identical to his to be effective." The observation was astute but only partially helpful. Richardson's shooting did improve slightly as he returned to his own natural stance and rhythm, but the awareness of the performance gap remained. The 500-meter target continued to present challenges that went beyond simple technical execution. By late afternoon, the training session had produced mixed results. A few of the Rangers had managed successful hits at the challenging distance, building confidence and demonstrating that the standard was achievable with persistent effort. Others had struggled throughout the day, their performance inconsistent, and their frustration evident. Harrison observed the concluding exercises from the observation platform, his expression thoughtful as he watched the varied results. The demonstration had served its intended purpose of establishing standards, but it had also revealed the psychological complexities of elite training. Not every student responded to challenges in the same way, and motivation could quickly become discouraged without careful management. "Tomorrow we'll work on building systematic approaches," Davis announced to his group as they secured their equipment. "Master the fundamentals at your own pace before worrying about matching anyone else's performance." The tactical rangers departed for their evening meal, their conversation subdued compared to the enthusiasm they had shown that morning. The day had been educational but humbling, providing both inspiration and a sobering assessment of the work required to achieve true precision at distance. As the range complex emptied, Marianne arrived to collect the day's equipment and begin her standard cleaning and maintenance routine. Spent brass littered the firing positions, and the rifles showed the wear of intensive use. She worked methodically, sorting components, checking for damage, and preparing everything for the next day's training. The rifles used by the tactical rangers were quality instruments, but they lacked the custom refinements of Harrison's personal weapon. She examined each one carefully, noting minor issues that could affect accuracy, slight looseness in scope mounts, trigger mechanisms that could benefit from adjustment, stocks that didn't quite fit the shooters who had been using them. These were the details that separated good shooting from exceptional shooting, the small factors that became magnified at extended distances. Harrison's success wasn't just about natural ability or superior technique. It was also about equipment that had been optimized for his specific requirements. As she worked, Marianne found herself thinking about the psychological dynamics she had observed throughout the day. The demonstration had been impressive, but it had also created artificial pressure that might actually hinder learning. Some of the rangers had shown more promise during yesterday's session, before they had been exposed to a standard that seemed impossibly high. The cleaning process was meditative, allowing her mind to analyze the technical aspects of what she had observed. Harrison's shooting was genuinely skilled, but it wasn't beyond the capabilities of dedicated professionals with proper training and equipment. The gap wasn't as insurmountable as it appeared to the struggling rangers. Evening settled over the facility as Marianne completed her work and secured the equipment for the night. The mountain air carried the crisp promise of autumn, and the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring another day of training, another opportunity for the tactical rangers to test themselves against the demanding 500-meter standard. Walking back to her cabin, she could see lights in the dining facility where the rangers were undoubtedly discussing the day's events. Some would be analyzing technique, others questioning their own abilities, and a few might be beginning to understand that excellence was built through persistent effort rather than natural talent alone. The forest path was familiar beneath her feet, each step guided by knowledge gained through years of walking the same route. The cane tapped softly against the packed earth, a steady rhythm that matched her thoughts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, and perhaps new insights into the complex relationship between ability, confidence, and the pressure to perform at exceptional levels. In her cabin, Marianne prepared her simple evening meal while considering the events she had witnessed. The world of the facility operated according to clear hierarchies: elite performers like Harrison at the top, competent professionals in the middle, and support personnel maintaining the foundation that allowed everything else to function. It was a system that rewarded visible excellence while often overlooking the quiet competence that made such excellence possible. The small wooden box on her dresser remained closed, its contents undisturbed by the day's events. The medals and commendations inside belonged to a different time, when her own shooting abilities had been recognized and utilized, rather than hidden behind the careful anonymity of her current role. That chapter of her life was closed, but the skills remained as sharp and reliable as ever. Outside her window, the facility settled into its evening routine. Lights dimmed in training buildings, voices faded from the dining areas, and the mountain wilderness reclaimed its natural quiet. Tomorrow would bring another day of striving, another opportunity for the tactical rangers to bridge the gap between competence and excellence, another chance for the hidden and the visible to intersect in ways that might surprise everyone involved. The emergency call came through at 2:47 a.m., shattering the peaceful silence of the mountain facility. Marianne woke instantly, her military-trained instincts responding to the distant sound of running footsteps and urgent voices carrying across the grounds. Through her cabin window, she could see lights blazing in the administrative building, and small groups of personnel moving with the purposeful haste that indicated a serious situation. She dressed quickly and made her way along the forest path, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. The facility's emergency protocols were well established, and her role as equipment coordinator meant she would likely be needed regardless of the specific nature of the crisis. The communications center buzzed with controlled urgency as staff members coordinated with outside agencies. Captain Harrison stood at the center of the activity, his uniform hastily assembled, but his bearing commanding as always. The large tactical display showed a topographical map of the surrounding wilderness, with several locations marked in red. "What's the situation?" Marianne asked quietly as she approached the duty officer's station. Lieutenant Garcia looked up from his communications console, his face grim. "Search and rescue operation. A research team went missing in the backcountry yesterday evening. There. Emergency beacon activated around midnight, but the signal is weak and intermittent. The missing team consisted of 3 geologists from the University of Oregon, who had been conducting mineral surveys in a remote section of the Cascade Wilderness. They were experienced outdoors professionals, but the terrain they had been working in was notoriously difficult: steep ravines, dense forest, and rocky areas where a single misstep could result in serious injury. "Weather's moving in from the west," Garcia continued, indicating satellite imagery on his screen. "A storm front should hit the area within 6 hours. If we don't locate them before then, visibility will drop to near zero and helicopter operations will be impossible." Harrison was coordinating with multiple agencies: county search and rescue, state police aviation, and federal wilderness management teams. The tactical rangers who had been training at the facility represented additional skilled personnel, but they were unfamiliar with the specific terrain and local conditions. "The beacon signal suggests they're in the Cedar Creek drainage," Harrison explained to the assembled group. "That's approximately 8 miles northeast of here, in some of the most challenging terrain in the region. Multiple ravines, heavy forest cover, and several areas where cell phone coverage is non-existent. The search would require splitting into teams that could cover different potential routes and locations. Each team needed experienced wilderness navigation specialists, medical personnel, and communications equipment. Most critically, they needed personnel capable of providing long-range reconnaissance and, if necessary, precision shooting to signal aircraft or respond to potential threats from wildlife. "I want sharpshooters with each team," Harrison declared. "At that distance from civilization, you might encounter bears or mountain lions. More importantly, if we need to signal rescue aircraft in poor visibility, precision flares or tracer rounds could be the difference between success and failure." The tactical rangers stepped forward immediately, their previous struggles with 500-meter shooting forgotten in the face of a real emergency. These were experienced professionals who understood that training challenges and actual operations required different mindsets. Lives were at stake, and their skills, whatever their current limitations, were needed. "Sir," Richardson said, speaking for the group, "we're ready to deploy immediately. All of us have search and rescue experience, and we can handle the shooting." "Requirements." Harrison nodded appreciatively. The Rangers' eagerness to help was admirable, but he was also aware of their recent performance difficulties. The psychological pressure that had affected their training might become even more problematic in a high-stakes real-world situation. "Sergeant Davis will lead Team Alpha," Harrison announced, beginning to assign personnel to search groups. "Richardson and Mitchell will provide marksmanship support. Team Bravo will be led by Lieutenant Walsh, with Thompson and Bradley as shooters." As the assignments continued, Marianne found herself in an unusual position. Emergency operations typically required all available personnel, but her role as equipment coordinator was normally considered support rather than operational. However, the missing research team had been using specialized geological equipment that she had personally checked out to them just 2 days earlier. "Thompson," Harrison called, noticing her presence. "I need you to review the equipment manifest for the missing team. Anything that might help us locate them: GPS units, communication devices, emergency supplies." Marianne moved to the equipment terminal and began pulling up the records. The research team had signed out standard backcountry gear, GPS units, satellite phones, emergency shelter, and 3 days' worth of food and water. More importantly, they had taken a portable weather station that transmitted data to university servers every 4 hours. "Their weather station last transmitted at 18:30 yesterday," she reported. "The signal originated from grid coordinates that put them approximately 3 miles northeast of their planned survey site." The information provided a critical starting point for the search teams. Instead of covering a broad area based on their original itinerary, rescuers could focus on the specific location where the team had last been confirmed active. "That narrows our search considerably," Harrison said with satisfaction. "Team Alpha will approach from the north, Team Bravo from the southeast. If they're injured and unable to move, they should be within a 2-mile radius of that last transmission." As the teams prepared to deploy, Marianne found herself assigned to remain at the facility as communication coordinator and equipment support. It was a logical assignment given her knowledge of the gear involved, but it also meant watching experienced personnel head into dangerous conditions to attempt a rescue that required capabilities she possessed but could not offer. The tactical Rangers gathered their personal equipment with professional efficiency, but Marianne could see the tension in their movements. Yesterday's shooting difficulties were weighing on their minds, particularly given Harrison's emphasis on the importance of marksmanship in the operation. The psychological pressure that had affected their training was now compounded by the knowledge that real lives depended on their performance. "Davis," Harrison called as the team leaders made final preparations. "Remember that conditions in the field will be challenging. Don't hesitate to call for additional support if you need it. We have helicopter assets standing by, weather permitting." The search teams departed as the first gray light of dawn began filtering through the mountain forests. Team Alpha took the northern approach, following established trails for the first several miles before branching into unmarked wilderness. Team Bravo approached from the southeast, using a combination of hiking trails and creek beds to navigate the difficult terrain. Marianne established herself in the communication center, maintaining radio contact with both teams and coordinating with external agencies. The county search and rescue coordinator was experienced but unfamiliar with the specific area where the research team had disappeared. State Police Aviation was standing by but couldn't launch until visibility improved. First reports from the search teams came within an hour of departure. Both groups were making good progress despite challenging terrain, but neither had located any signs of the missing researchers. The weather front continued to approach from the west, bringing clouds that would soon obscure the mountain peaks and reduce visibility to dangerous levels. "Alpha Team, this is base," Marianne transmitted. "Weather update shows storm arrival in approximately 4 hours. Recommend accelerating search pattern." "Copy, base," came Davis's voice through the radio. "Static. We're approaching the target grid coordinates now. Terrain is more difficult than the maps indicated, multiple ravines and heavy forest cover." Team Bravo reported similar conditions from their approach route. The Cedar Creek drainage was proving to be even more challenging than anticipated, with steep slopes, dense vegetation, and rocky areas that could conceal injured personnel or provide shelter from the elements. As the morning progressed, the urgency of the situation increased. The storm front was moving faster than initially predicted, and the missing research team had now been without contact for over 12 hours. If they were injured and unable to move, their survival depended on being located before the weather made rescue operations impossible. "Base, this is Bravo Team," Lieutenant Walsh's voice crackled through the radio. "We've located equipment debris in a ravine approximately 1 mile south of the target coordinates. Appears to be geological survey gear, but no sign of personnel." The discovery provided the first concrete evidence of the research team's location, but it also suggested that something had gone seriously wrong. Experienced researchers wouldn't abandon expensive equipment unless forced to by emergency circumstances. "Alpha Team, redirect to Bravo's position," Harrison ordered. "Converge on the debris site and expand the search from there." The tactical situation was becoming more complex as the search teams navigated difficult terrain while trying to locate missing persons who might be injured, lost, or trapped. The approaching storm added time pressure that affected every decision and movement. It was Richardson who made the critical discovery. While searching a steep ravine wall approximately 200 meters from the equipment debris, he spotted what appeared to be fabric caught on a rocky outcropping about 150 feet above the ravine floor. The location was nearly inaccessible, too steep for safe climbing and partially concealed by overhanging rock formations. "Base, this is Alpha Team," Richardson transmitted. "Possible sighting of personnel or equipment on the north wall of the ravine. Location is approximately 150 feet vertical, inaccessible by normal climbing routes." The discovery presented a new challenge. If the research team was trapped on the ravine wall, either by injury or terrain difficulties, a conventional rescue would require specialized climbing equipment and techniques that would take hours to organize. With the storm approaching, time was a luxury they didn't possess. "Can you confirm it's human?" Harrison asked through the radio. "Negative, Base. Distance and angle make visual confirmation impossible. We need better observation or a way to signal the location." The tactical problem was clear. The search teams needed to determine whether the fabric sighting represented actual personnel and, if so, establish communication or provide assistance. The distance and terrain made normal signaling methods ineffective, but a precision shot with a tracer round or signaling device might be visible from the suspected location. "Richardson, can you manage a precision shot to that location?" Davis asked. "Tracer round might get their attention if someone's there." The question hung in the radio silence for several seconds. Richardson was an experienced ranger and a competent marksman, but his recent struggles with long-distance shooting were fresh in everyone's mind. The distance to the target was approximately 200 meters at a steep upward angle challenging under ideal conditions, potentially impossible in the current circumstances. "I'll attempt it," Richardson finally responded. Though uncertainty was evident in his voice, the shot was difficult not just because of distance and angle, but because of the consequences of failure. A missed shot might dislodge rocks that could endanger anyone trapped above. Too low, and the round might ricochet dangerously. Too high, and it would provide no useful signal to potential survivors. Marianne listened to the radio exchange with growing concern. She could hear the tension in Richardson's voice, the pressure affecting someone who was already struggling with confidence issues. The psychological burden of the situation was exactly the kind of factor that could cause even experienced professionals to make critical errors. "Base, this is Alpha Team," came Richardson's voice after several minutes. Shot placement was unsuccessful. The round impacted approximately 30 meters short of target location. The failure wasn't catastrophic, but it represented a lost opportunity and additional pressure on an already difficult situation. The storm was continuing to approach, visibility was beginning to deteriorate, and the search teams were no closer to establishing contact with the missing researchers. "Bravo Team, can you attempt the signaling shot from your position?" Harrison asked. "Negative, Base. Angle is wrong from our location, too much risk of ricochet into the ravine." The tactical situation was reaching a critical point. Standard rescue procedures were proving inadequate for the challenging terrain and deteriorating conditions. The missing research team might be within 200 meters of the search teams, but remain inaccessible due to the limitations of available resources and capabilities. It was at this moment that Marianne made a decision that would change everything. She had maintained her careful anonymity for 3 years, supporting others while keeping her own capabilities hidden. But 3 lives hung in the balance, and the skills she possessed might be the difference between successful rescue and tragic failure. "Captain Harrison," she said quietly, her voice carrying a certainty that hadn't been there before. "I need to join the search team." Harrison looked up from the tactical display, surprise evident on his face. "Thompson, your role is communication. Support. The terrain is too dangerous for non-operational personnel." "Sir," Marianne said, meeting his gaze steadily, "I can make that shot." The statement hung in the air between them, simple and direct. Harrison studied her face, seeing something in her expression that hadn't been there during the 3 years she had worked at the facility. The quiet equipment coordinator was gone, replaced by someone whose confidence was absolute and unshakable. "What are you saying, Thompson?" "I'm saying that I can place a precision shot at 200 meters, upward angle in current wind conditions, with enough accuracy to signal potential survivors without endangering them." Her voice was calm, professional, and carried the weight of absolute certainty. Harrison's mind raced through the implications. He had never seen Thompson handle a firearm, had never heard her discuss shooting experience, had never seen any indication that she possessed the kind of precision marksmanship skills that the current situation required. Yet something in her demeanor suggested that her offer wasn't bravado or desperation. "What's your background, Thompson?" he asked quietly. "Sufficient for the current requirement, sir." The non-answer was itself an answer. Military personnel learn to recognize certain patterns of speech, certain ways of deflecting questions about classified or sensitive backgrounds. Thompson's response suggested experience that she hadn't chosen to reveal during her time at the facility. Outside, the storm clouds were building over the mountain peaks, and time was running out for the missing research team. The search teams were in position but lacked the precision capabilities needed to establish contact with potential survivors. Conventional rescue methods were proving inadequate for the challenging circumstances. Harrison made his decision with the quick calculation of a combat leader weighing risk against potential benefit. "Get your gear, Thompson. You're going in with the next helicopter lift." As Marianne moved to gather equipment, she felt the familiar calm settling over her, the mental state that had carried her through countless operations where precision and reliability had meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The careful anonymity she had maintained was about to be shattered, but 3 lives were worth more than her comfortable invisibility. The storm was coming. The terrain was dangerous, and the shot would be as challenging as any she had faced. But her hands were steady, her mind was clear, and the skills that had once defined her remained as sharp as ever. The moment of truth was approaching, and she was ready for it. The helicopter's rotors cut through the thickening mountain air as Marianne secured her equipment and checked the rifle one final time. The aircraft bucked slightly in the growing wind, a reminder that the approaching storm was making flight operations increasingly dangerous. Through the window, she could see the Cedar Creek drainage below, a maze of steep ravines and dense forest that had swallowed 3 researchers and was now challenging the best rescue teams the region could assemble. Across from her sat Lieutenant Walsh, leader of Bravo Team, his expression a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The emergency had brought out personnel from throughout the facility, but adding the equipment coordinator to a dangerous rescue operation was unprecedented. Walsh had served with special operations units before his assignment to the Ranger Service, and he recognized the type of quiet confidence Marianne displayed, though he couldn't reconcile it with her civilian role at the facility. "Thompson," Walsh said over the helicopter's noise, "I need to know what we're working with here. Captain Harrison vouched for your shooting ability, but this isn't a controlled range. Terrain is unstable, the wind is gusting, and we've got injured civilians depending on precision under pressure." Marianne adjusted the rifle's sling across her shoulder, the weight familiar despite 3 years away from operational use. "The fundamentals don't change based on circumstances, Lieutenant. Distance, wind, angle, target, calculate the variables, and execute the shot." Her response was matter-of-fact, delivered without bravado or uncertainty. Walsh studied her face, noting the calm focus that had replaced the quiet anonymity he had observed during her routine equipment duties. Something fundamental had shifted in Thompson's demeanor, as if the emergency had awakened capabilities that had been deliberately dormant. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. "LZ Alpha in 2 minutes." The weather's deteriorating faster than predicted. This might be our last flight before the storm hits. Below them, Alpha Team was visible as small figures positioned around the ravine where Richardson had spotted the fabric. The terrain was even more challenging from the air vertical rock faces, unstable tailless slopes, and dense canopy that could conceal a dozen potential hazards. The location where someone might be trapped was a narrow ledge approximately 150 feet up the north wall, accessible only by technical climbing or helicopter insertion. There, Walsh pointed through the aircraft window. See the orange fabric on that outcropping? That's our target. The question is whether it's equipment, clothing, or just debris blown by wind. Marianne studied the location through binoculars, calculating angles and distances with the automatic precision of someone who had made such assessments countless times before. The shot would be technically challenging, approximately 200 meters horizontal distance, 45-degree upward angle, with gusty crosswinds that could affect trajectory significantly. Wind is variable between 10 and 20 knots, shifting direction every few seconds, she observed. The angle adds complexity, but the distance is manageable. Primary concern will be timing the shot between wind gusts. Walsh nodded, though part of him remained skeptical about the equipment coordinator's apparent expertise. Emergency situations sometimes brought out unexpected capabilities in people, but precision marksmanship at extended range required years of training and experience that seemed inconsistent with Thompson's background. The helicopter touched down on a small clearing approximately 300 meters from the ravine edge, the closest safe landing zone to the target area. As soon as the skids contacted the ground, Marianne was moving with practiced efficiency, gathering her equipment and exiting the aircraft with the smooth coordination of someone accustomed to helicopter operations. Davis approached as the rotors wound down, his expression showing the strain of several hours searching dangerous terrain without success. Thompson, glad you're here. We need to establish contact with whoever might be on that ledge, but conventional signaling isn't working. What? Have you tried? Marianne asked, already moving toward the ravine edge to assess the shooting position. Voice calls, whistle signals, mirror flashes when we had sun, Davis replied. Either nobody's there, or they're unconscious, injured, or unable to respond to normal signals. The tactical situation was becoming critical as the storm continued to approach. Cloud cover was thickening, visibility was decreasing, and the wind was becoming more erratic. If the missing researchers were indeed trapped on the ledge, they were running out of time before weather conditions made rescue impossible. Richardson approached with obvious relief at seeing additional help arrive. His earlier failed shot was weighing on him, particularly given the stakes involved. Thompson, I tried to place a tracer round near that location, but the angle and wind threw off my calculations. Impacted about 30 meters short. Marianne nodded, without judgment. Richardson was a competent marksman under normal circumstances, but the combination of psychological pressure, challenging conditions, and recent confidence issues had affected his performance. The failure wasn't a reflection of his abilities so much as the compounding effects of stress and self-doubt. Let me assess the position, Marianne said, moving toward the edge of the ravine where the shooting lane was clearest. The other team members followed, curious to see how the equipment coordinator would approach a challenge that had proven difficult for an experienced tactical ranger. Some exchanged glances that suggested skepticism about her claimed abilities, while others maintained professional reserve about capabilities they hadn't personally witnessed. Marianne settled into a prone position at the ravine edge. The rifle's bipod extended and adjusted for the steep upward angle required. She checked wind indicators, vegetation movement, dust patterns, the feel of air currents against her skin. The gusty conditions were indeed challenging, requiring precise timing to ensure the shot occurred during a relative lull. Range to target is 197 meters, she announced, her voice calm and professional. Elevation angle approximately 42 degrees. Wind variable from southwest, 8 to 18 knots with occasional gusts to 25. The precision of her range estimation impressed the observers. Without laser range-finding equipment, she had calculated distance using techniques that required considerable experience and training. Her assessment of wind conditions was equally detailed, accounting for factors that would significantly affect trajectory at the required distance. "What's your plan?" Walsh asked, settling beside her with binoculars to observe the target area. Tracer round placed on the rock face, approximately 2 meters to the left of the fabric. Marianne replied, adjusting the rifle's scope for the calculated range and elevation. "Close enough to get attention if someone's there. Far enough away to avoid danger from ricochets or falling debris." The plan was sound a precision shot that would provide clear visual and audible signals without endangering potential survivors. However, the execution required marksmanship skills that went well beyond basic competency. The combination of distance, angle, and wind conditions would challenge even experienced precision shooters. Richardson moved closer, his professional interest overcoming his earlier disappointment. Despite his recent struggles, he remained an experienced marksman who could appreciate the technical difficulty of the shot Thompson was attempting. "Those wind gusts are the real problem," he observed. "Even a slight miscalculation at this distance could throw the impact off by several meters." "Timing is everything," Marianne agreed, settling into her shooting position with the methodical precision of someone following long-established routines. "Wait for the lull between gusts, read the vegetation movement at different ranges, trust the ballistic calculation." The observers watched as she worked through her pre-shot routine. Every movement was economical and purposeful, stock placement against her shoulder, cheek weld against the comb, breathing pattern establishing rhythm, trigger finger finding its proper position. The transformation from equipment coordinator to precision marksman was striking in its completeness. "Wind's settling," Davis observed, watching vegetation movement through his binoculars. "Looks like we're getting a brief lull." Marianne felt the change in air pressure against her skin, the momentary stillness that indicated a temporary break in the gusty conditions. Her breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that preceded precision shots, her focus narrowing to the essential elements: sight picture, wind reading, trigger control. "On target," she announced quietly, indicating that her preparation was complete and she was ready to take the shot. The observers held their breath, aware they were witnessing a critical moment in the rescue operation. If Thompson's shot was successful, it might establish contact with potential survivors and provide hope for successful rescue. If it failed, valuable time would be lost and confidence in alternative approaches would be shaken. Through the rifle scope, Marianne could see the orange fabric clearly, definitely clothing rather than equipment, and positioned in a way that suggested someone might indeed be sheltered on the narrow ledge. The precision required for the shot was well within her capabilities, but the stakes made every detail critical. "Shot coming," she warned, giving the observers time to prepare their own observation equipment. The rifle cracked with authority, the sound echoing off the ravine walls, before being absorbed by the forest. Through binoculars, the observers tracked the tracer's bright streak as it arced upward toward the target location. The round struck exactly where Marianne had intended, on the rock face 2 meters left of the fabric, close enough to be unmistakable, but far enough away to avoid danger. "Perfect placement," Walsh called out, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "Right on target." The immediate aftermath of the shot brought new urgency to the rescue operation. Within seconds of the tracer's impact, movement was visible on the ledge. A figure appeared briefly, waving what appeared to be a piece of bright clothing. The signal was weak and lasted only moments, but it confirmed what the rescue teams had hoped. At least one of the missing researchers was alive and aware of the rescue effort. "Contact," Davis transmitted over the radio. Visual confirmation of survivors on the north ledge. Repeat, we have contact with survivors. The psychological impact of the successful shot extended beyond its immediate tactical value. The precision. Demonstration had not only established contact with survivors, but had also revealed capabilities in Thompson that no one had suspected. The quiet equipment coordinator had delivered a technically perfect shot under challenging conditions, displaying skills that suggested extensive training and experience. "Thompson," Richardson said quietly, "that was exceptional shooting. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" The question carried weight beyond simple curiosity. Richardson was an experienced professional who understood the level of training required for such precision, and he recognized that Thompson's abilities suggested a background that extended far beyond equipment coordination. "Practice," Marianne replied simply, already focused on the next phase of the rescue operation. "The shot was just the beginning. Now we need to get people up to that ledge." Her deflection was professional but incomplete, maintaining the mystery, surrounding her background while redirecting attention to the immediate tactical requirements. The successful shot had established her credibility, but it had also raised questions about her past that would require careful navigation. The confirmation of survivors transformed the rescue operation's urgency and focus. Instead of searching for missing persons who might or might not be alive, the teams now faced the challenge of extracting injured people from a precarious location before the approaching storm made operations impossible. "Base, this is Alpha Team," Davis transmitted. "We need immediate helicopter support with hoist capability. Survivors are located on inaccessible ledge at transmitted coordinates. The weather window is closing rapidly." Harrison's voice crackled. Back through the radio, "Helicopter is inbound. ETA 8 minutes. The storm front is moving faster than predicted. This will be our only extraction opportunity." The time pressure added new complexity to an already challenging situation. Helicopter hoist operations were dangerous under ideal conditions, and the combination of high winds, poor visibility, and unstable air currents would test the limits of both equipment and crew capabilities. As the rescue teams prepared for the extraction phase, the dynamics among the personnel had shifted subtly. Thompson's successful shot had established her as someone with exceptional capabilities, but it had also created questions about her background and role at the facility. The quiet anonymity she had maintained for 3 years was beginning to unravel. Mitchell approached as she cleaned and secured the rifle. "That shot was military-grade precision," he said quietly. "I've worked with special operations snipers who couldn't have done better under these conditions." The observation was astute and carried implications that went beyond simple marksmanship. Appreciation. Mitchell's background included joint operations with elite military units, and he recognized the kind of shooting that suggested advanced training and operational experience. "Focus on the rescue," Marianne replied, maintaining her professional demeanor while deflecting the implied questions. "The hard part is still ahead." The approaching helicopter's rotors became audible over the wind, growing louder as the aircraft battled increasingly difficult flying conditions. The pilot would have limited time and few opportunities to position for a safe hoist operation, requiring precise coordination between ground teams and aircrew. As the rescue entered its critical phase, Marianne found herself in an increasingly visible role, despite her preference for remaining in the background. The successful shot had demonstrated capabilities that couldn't be easily explained away, and the questions about her background were multiplying among team members who possessed enough experience to recognize exceptional skills when they saw them. The storm clouds were building overhead, and the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. Time was running out for a successful rescue, and every decision would need to be executed with precision and confidence. The shot that had established contact with survivors was only the beginning of a complex operation that would test everyone's abilities under extreme conditions. Through it all, Marianne maintained the calm focus that had characterized her approach to every challenge. The careful anonymity of her civilian role was giving way to the operational requirements of the situation, but her primary concern remained the successful rescue of the missing researchers. Personal considerations would have to wait until lives were no longer hanging in the balance. The helicopter's approach marked the beginning of the most dangerous phase of the rescue operation, and everyone involved understood that the margin for error was rapidly disappearing. Success would require the coordinated efforts of skilled professionals operating at the limits of their capabilities, and failure was not an option with lives at stake. The helicopter fought against increasingly violent wind shears as it approached the extraction site, its airframe shuddering with each gust that swept down from the mountain peaks. Pilot Chief Warrant Officer Sandra Kim had over 2,000 hours of mountain rescue experience, but the deteriorating conditions were pushing even her considerable skills to their limits. Through her headset, she could hear the tension in the voices of the ground team as they coordinated the complex rescue operation. "Ground team, this is Rescue 1, Kim transmitted. "Winds are gusting to 35 knots with severe downdrafts. I can give you one pass, maybe two if we're lucky. After that, we're grounded until this storm passes." On the ground, the rescue teams had positioned themselves to guide the helicopter's approach while maintaining visual contact with the survivors on the ledge. The orange fabric that had first caught Richardson's attention was now clearly identifiable as a jacket being waved by one of the trapped researchers. Two other figures were visible on the narrow rock shelf, at least one appearing to be injured and unable to move independently. Marianne had taken position at a vantage point that provided both communication with the helicopter crew and clear observation of the rescue target. The rifle remained ready beside her, not for another signaling shot, but for potential emergency situations that might require precision intervention. Mountain rescues could develop complications quickly, and her demonstrated marksmanship abilities made her a valuable asset for unforeseen circumstances. "Survivors appear to be hypothermic," Lieutenant Walsh reported through binoculars. "Limited movement, and one person hasn't been seen moving at all. We need to get them off that ledge immediately." The medical situation added urgency to an already critical timeline. Hypothermia could be fatal within hours, especially if the victims were also dealing with injuries from whatever accident had stranded them on the ledge. The approaching storm would bring temperatures down further and eliminate any possibility of rescue until conditions improved. As the helicopter maneuvered into position for the hoist operation, a new complication became apparent. The downdrafts created by the aircraft's rotors were causing loose rock to fall from the cliff face above the survivors' position. Each stone that tumbled down the ravine wall represented a potential catastrophe for people who had no room to maneuver on their precarious perch. "Rotor wash is destabilizing the rock face," Davis observed with growing concern. "If we can't control the debris fall, the rescue attempt might kill the people we're trying to save." The tactical problem was unprecedented in the experience of most team members. Standard helicopter rescue procedures assumed stable ground conditions and predictable environmental factors. The combination of unstable geology, severe weather, and injured survivors created variables that fell outside normal operational parameters. It was Marianne who identified the solution, her military background providing experience with unconventional rescue scenarios. "Kim," she transmitted directly to the helicopter pilot, "can you position the aircraft 50 meters north of the target and approach from an angle that should minimize rotor wash impact on the loose rock while still allowing hoist operations?" The suggestion was technically sound but operationally challenging. The angled approach would require the pilot to maintain precise positioning in turbulent conditions while the rescue specialist descended to an unstable target area. Margin for error would be minimal, and any mistake could result in multiple casualties. "Roger that," Kim replied after a moment's consideration. "It's going to be tight, but it's our best option under these conditions. As the helicopter repositioned, Marianne found herself becoming the unofficial coordinator between ground teams and aircrew. Her precise understanding of the tactical situation, combined with her demonstrated competence under pressure, had naturally elevated her from support personnel to operational leader. Despite her official role at the facility, the transformation was noticed by the experienced tactical rangers, who recognized leadership capabilities that extended far beyond equipment coordination. Mitchell, observing Marianne's calm direction of the complex operation, made a mental note to investigate her background more thoroughly once the immediate crisis was resolved. "Rescue specialist is ready for deployment," Kim announced as the helicopter stabilized in its new position. "Flight medic Rodriguez will assess survivors and prepare them for extraction." Senior Airman Carlos Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran of mountain rescue operations, experienced in treating hypothermia, trauma, and evacuation procedures under extreme conditions. However, even his extensive background hadn't prepared him for the psychological pressure of descending to an unstable ledge while rocks continued to fall around the target area. "Rodriguez, this is Thompson on the ground," Marianne transmitted as the rescue specialist began his descent. "Survivors show signs of severe hypothermia. Prioritize rapid extraction over detailed medical assessment. The weather window is closing. Fast." The communication was professional and direct, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. Rodriguez acknowledged the guidance while focusing on the challenging task of reaching survivors, who were becoming increasingly difficult to see through the thickening weather. As the rescue operation reached its most critical phase, a new emergency developed that would test everyone's capabilities to their absolute limits. The injured researcher who had been motionless on the ledge suddenly began sliding toward the edge, apparently losing consciousness or grip on the rock face that had been providing stability. "Emergency," Walsh called out through binoculars. "One of the survivors is sliding off the ledge." The situation had become catastrophic in seconds. Rodriguez was still 30 feet above the ledge on his descent line, too far away to provide immediate assistance. The helicopter couldn't descend further without risking collision with the cliff face, and the sliding researcher would fall over 150 feet to certain death. If something didn't stop the movement immediately, it was then that Marianne made a decision that would reveal the full extent of her capabilities. Without hesitation, she shouldered the rifle and acquired the target, not the falling researcher, but a small rock outcropping approximately 2 feet to the right of the sliding figure. "What are you doing?" Richardson asked, not understanding her intention. "Creating an anchor point," Marianne replied calmly, her voice steady despite the extreme pressure of the situation. "The impact will jam loose rock and provide something to catch against." The shot required absolute precision under impossible conditions. She needed to place a bullet exactly where it would create maximum disruption of loose material without risking injury to the survivors. The range was nearly 200 meters at a steep upward angle, with gusting winds that could affect trajectory by several feet. More critically, she had only one opportunity. A missed shot might dislodge more rocks and accelerate the disaster, or worse, might directly impact one of the researchers. The margin for error was literally measured in inches, and 3 lives hung in the balance. The wind momentarily stilled, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Marianne felt the familiar calm settle over her, the mental state that had carried her through countless operations where failure meant death. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and her focus narrowed to the essential elements of the shot. "Target acquired," she announced quietly, more to herself than to the observers. The rifle cracked with finality, the sound echoing off the ravine walls as the bullet streaked upward toward its target. The impact was precisely where Marianne had intended, striking the rock outcropping with enough force to jam several loose stones, into a configuration that would catch and hold a sliding object. The effect was immediate and exactly as calculated. The injured researcher's slide was arrested by the newly created obstacle, wedging against the jammed rocks just 3 feet from the edge of the fatal drop. The precision of the shot had created a life-saving anchor point where none had existed. Moments before, incredible, Rodriguez called from his position on the descent line. The shot created a perfect catch point. I've got visuals on all 3 survivors now. The rescue operation continued with renewed urgency as Rodriguez reached the ledge and began assessing the survivors' conditions. 2 were conscious but severely hypothermic, while the third, the one who had nearly fallen, was unconscious but breathing. All 3 would require immediate medical attention and rapid evacuation. Rodriguez, prioritize the unconscious subject for first extraction, Marianne directed. Hypothermia cases can wait another few minutes, but head trauma or internal injuries can't. Again, her guidance was medically sound and operationally practical, suggesting experience with trauma medicine under field conditions. The rescue specialist acknowledged her recommendations, while working to secure the first survivor in the evacuation harness. As the extraction proceeded, the ground team members found themselves looking at Marianne with new understanding. The equipment coordinator, who had worked quietly among them for 3 years, had just demonstrated shooting skills that bordered on the supernatural. More significantly, she was directing a complex rescue operation with the competence of someone who had managed similar crises many times before. "Thompson," Davis said quietly as they watched the first survivor being lifted toward the helicopter, "that shot was the most impressive piece of marksmanship I've ever witnessed. You literally saved that person's life with precision shooting." The acknowledgement was significant coming from Davis, whose 20-year career had included joint operations with elite military units and specialized law enforcement teams. His recognition carried weight among the other tactical rangers, who were beginning to understand that they had seriously underestimated their quiet colleague. The helicopter extraction continued against increasingly difficult conditions as the storm intensified. Each lift required precise coordination between pilot, rescue specialist, and ground team, with Marianne providing the central coordination that kept the operation functioning smoothly. Her calm competence under pressure was becoming the steadying factor that allowed everyone else to perform at their best. "The second survivor is secure and ascending," Rodriguez reported as the evacuation harness lifted away from the ledge. "Conscious and responsive, but showing severe hypothermia symptoms." The medical assessments were encouraging. Both survivors extracted so far appeared to have good chances of recovery with proper treatment. However, the third extraction would be the most challenging, as the remaining researcher was unconscious and would require more complex rigging to ensure safe transport. As the second survivor reached the helicopter, Kim's voice crackled with urgency. "Ground team, weather is deteriorating beyond safe operating limits. This will definitely be our last extraction opportunity. If we don't get the third survivor up in the next 5 minutes, we'll have to abort." The time pressure was now absolute. The unconscious researcher represented their final rescue opportunity before the storm made further operations impossible. Everyone involved understood that failure would mean leaving someone to die on the mountainside, an outcome that was unacceptable to the professional rescuers involved. "Rodriguez, expedite final extraction," Marianne transmitted. "Use rapid rigging medical. Stabilization can happen during transport." The rescue specialist acknowledged while working quickly to secure the unconscious survivor. The technique was more dangerous than standard procedures, but it was the only option given the deteriorating conditions and limited time remaining. As the final extraction began, another crisis developed. The helicopter's positioning became unstable, as severe wind shears buffeted the aircraft, causing the hoist line to swing dangerously close to the cliff face. The unconscious survivor, suspended in the evacuation harness, was at risk of impact with the rock wall during the ascent. Without hesitation, Marianne shouldered the rifle once more. This time, her target was a large boulder that was creating turbulence in the air current, deflecting wind flow in a way that was destabilizing the helicopter's position. A precisely placed shot might dislodge the rock and improve the airflow pattern. "Thompson, what's your target?" Walsh asked, tracking her aim through binoculars. "Wind deflection boulder at 180 meters, she replied, already calculating the shot. Removing it should smooth the air current and stabilize the extraction. The technical understanding required for such a shot went far beyond basic marksmanship. Marianne was demonstrating knowledge of aerodynamics, ballistics, and environmental factors that suggested advanced training in multiple specialized fields. The observers were beginning to realize they were witnessing capabilities that few people in the world possessed. The shot was perfect, striking the boulder with enough force to shift its position and alter the wind pattern exactly as intended. The effect on the helicopter's stability was immediate. The dangerous oscillations ceased, and the final extraction proceeded smoothly to completion. "All survivors recovered," Kim announced as the helicopter pulled away from the mountain. "Excellent work, ground team. That was the most complex rescue I've been involved with in 15 years. As the aircraft disappeared into the storm clouds, carrying the rescued researchers toward medical treatment, the ground team began securing their equipment and preparing for their own extraction. The emergency was over, but the impact of what they had witnessed was just beginning to register. Richardson approached Marianne as she cleaned and secured the rifle. "Thompson, I need to ask directly, what's your background? Those shots weren't just good shooting. They were expert level precision under impossible conditions." The question carried the weight of professional curiosity from someone who understood the technical difficulty of what he had witnessed. Richardson's own struggles with precision shooting made him particularly appreciative of the level of skill Marianne had demonstrated. "Military," Marianne replied simply, offering the minimum information necessary to satisfy immediate curiosity while maintaining privacy about specific details. "What unit?" Mitchell pressed his own military background, making him curious about the specific training that could produce such capabilities. "Need to know," Marianne responded with a slight smile, using the military phrase that indicated classified information. The response was both an answer and a deflection, suggesting background that couldn't be fully discussed. As the team prepared for helicopter extraction back to the facility, the dynamics among the personnel had fundamentally changed. The quiet equipment coordinator had revealed herself to be someone with extraordinary capabilities, but she had also demonstrated the kind of leadership and competence under pressure that commanded respect from highly experienced professionals. The storm was now fully upon them, with rain beginning to fall heavily and visibility dropping to dangerous levels. Their own extraction would need to happen quickly before conditions became impossible for flight operations. As they waited for the helicopter's return, each team member was processing what they had witnessed and what it meant for their understanding of someone they thought they knew. The rescue operation had been successful, but it had also shattered assumptions and raised questions that would need to be addressed. Marianne Thompson was clearly much more than she had appeared to be, and her demonstration of exceptional capabilities under extreme pressure had established her as someone whose background deserved serious investigation. The mountain storm continued to build around them, but the immediate crisis was over. 3 lives had been saved through a combination of skilled teamwork and extraordinary individual performance. As they prepared to return to the facility, everyone involved understood that they had participated in something exceptional, a rescue operation that had pushed everyone to their limits and revealed capabilities that few had suspected existed. The questions about Thompson's background would have to wait, but they would definitely be asked. The quiet anonymity she had maintained for 3 years had been permanently shattered by her Performance under the ultimate test of skill and character. The helicopter touched down at the facility as the storm reached full intensity. Rain lashing across the landing pad in sheets that reduced visibility to mere yards. The rescued research team was immediately transferred to waiting ambulances, their hypothermia and injuries requiring urgent medical attention at the regional hospital. As the medical personnel worked with practiced efficiency, the rescue team members gathered in the operations center to debrief what had been the most challenging mission any of them had experienced. Captain Harrison stood before the assembled group, his expression mixing relief at the successful outcome with growing curiosity about the events that had made that success possible. The initial reports from the field teams had been extraordinary precision shooting under impossible conditions, tactical leadership from unexpected sources, and problem solving that had literally meant the difference between life and death. Before we begin the formal debrief, Harrison announced, I want to acknowledge that today's operation succeeded because of exceptional performance under extreme pressure. All team members performed admirably, but I'm particularly interested in understanding some of the tactical decisions that proved critical to our success. The statement was diplomatically phrased, but everyone in the room understood its focus. Thompson's emergence as a key operational figure had been the most surprising element of the rescue, and her demonstrated capabilities demanded explanation and recognition. Lieutenant Walsh stepped forward first, his report precise and professional. Sir, Thompson's precision shooting was the decisive factor in establishing survivor contact and completing the extractions. Without her interventions, we would have lost at least one life, possibly all three. The assessment was delivered without exaggeration or dramatic emphasis, carrying the weight of professional judgment from an experienced special operations veteran. Walsh's credibility among the tactical community made his evaluation particularly significant. Specifically, Walsh continued, Thompson placed a precision shot at 197 meters, steep upward angle in gusting cross winds to establish contact with survivors. Later, she created an anchor point that prevented a fatality during the extraction, followed by a final shot that stabilized helicopter operations. Each shot was technically perfect and operationally critical. Richardson nodded in agreement, his own recent struggles with precision shooting making him particularly appreciative of what he had witnessed. Sir, I attempted the initial contact. Shot and failed. Thompson succeeded under identical conditions with absolute precision. The difference in skill level was substantial. The admission was difficult for Richardson, a 20-year veteran who took pride in his marksmanship abilities, but his honesty reflected the professionalism that characterized elite personnel. Recognizing superior capability was as important as demonstrating competence, and Richardson's assessment carried significant weight. Mitchell, whose background included joint operations with Special Forces units, provided additional context. Captain, based on my experience with military marksmen, Thompson's shooting today was consistent with advanced sniper training. The precision, the tactical thinking, the calm under pressure, these suggest extensive combat experience. The observation hung in the air as Harrison processed its implications. The equipment coordinator, who had worked quietly at the facility for 3 years, had displayed capabilities that typically required years of specialized military training and operational experience. The disconnect between her official role and demonstrated abilities demanded investigation. Thompson, Harrison said, turning his attention to Marianne, who had remained quietly in the background during the other reports. Your performance today was exceptional by any standard. I think it's time we understood your background more completely. Marianne met his gaze steadily, understanding that the moment of revelation had arrived. The careful anonymity she had maintained for 3 years was no longer sustainable after her public demonstration of capabilities that couldn't be easily explained away. Staff Sergeant Marianne Thompson, 75th Ranger Regiment, retired. she said simply. 8 years active duty, including deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq as a designated marksman. The room fell silent as the implications registered. The 75th Ranger Regiment was among the most elite units in the U.S. military, and designated marksmen were selected from the best shooters in already exceptional organizations. Thompson's background explained her capabilities, while raising questions about how someone with such credentials had ended up in a civilian support role. "Why didn't you mention this when you applied for the equipment coordinator position?" Harrison asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. "It wasn't relevant to the job requirements," Marianne replied. "I was looking for a quiet position away from operational responsibilities. The facility offered that opportunity." The explanation was honest but incomplete, touching on motivations that went deeper than simple career preferences. Harrison recognized the careful phrasing that suggested personal considerations beyond professional requirements. Davis, who had led Alpha Team during the rescue, stepped forward with a question that reflected the thoughts of several team members. "Thompson, with your background, why aren't you in an instructor role? The tactical training program could benefit enormously from your experience." It was Dr. Coleman who provided insight into the deeper psychology of Thompson's situation. As the facility's chief psychologist, she had worked with numerous military veterans transitioning to civilian careers, and she recognized patterns that others might miss. Many combat veterans seek positions that allow them to stay connected to their military skills while avoiding the high-stress responsibilities of active operations. Coleman explained, the equipment coordinator role would provide daily contact with weapons and tactical gear while maintaining emotional distance from life or death decisions. The observation was professionally astute and personally sensitive, acknowledging that Thompson's career choices might reflect psychological needs rather than simple professional preferences. Many veterans struggled with the transition from high-intensity military service to civilian life, particularly those who had served in specialized roles that defined their identity. Marianne nodded slightly, appreciating Coleman's understanding. "After 8 years of operational deployments, I wanted a role where my decisions didn't determine whether people lived or died. Equipment coordination seemed to offer that distance." The honesty of her response resonated with the military veterans in the room, who understood the psychological weight of combat responsibilities. The decision to step away from leadership roles was often more difficult than remaining in high-pressure positions, requiring acknowledgement of personal limitations and the courage to prioritize mental health over career advancement. "But today," Richardson observed, "you made decisions that definitely determined whether people lived or died. And you made them perfectly." The comment highlighted the irony of Thompson's situation, her attempt to avoid life or death. Responsibilities had led directly to a situation where those same capabilities were essential for saving lives. The rescue operation had demonstrated that her skills remained sharp despite 3 years away from operational roles. Harrison was processing the revelations while considering their implications for facility operations. Having someone with Thompson's background and demonstrated capabilities in a support role represented both an opportunity and a challenge. Her expertise could significantly enhance training programs, but only if she was willing to accept increased responsibilities. "Thompson," Harrison said carefully, "I'd like to discuss expanding your role at the facility. Your demonstrated expertise could be valuable in our advanced training programs." The offer was diplomatically presented, avoiding pressure while clearly indicating Harrison's interest in utilizing Thompson's capabilities more fully. However, Marianne's response suggested that her original motivations for seeking a quiet role remained relevant. "Captain, I appreciate the offer, but I'm content with my current responsibilities. Today was an emergency situation that required immediate response. It doesn't change my preference for supporting rather than leading operational activities." The polite declination was firm, but not dismissive, indicating that Thompson's psychological needs for distance from high-pressure responsibilities hadn't changed despite her successful performance during the rescue. Her comfort zone remained. In support roles that utilized her skills without placing her in positions of operational command, the debrief continued with technical discussions of the rescue operation, but the focus had fundamentally shifted. Thompson's background had been revealed, her capabilities had been demonstrated, and her preferences had been stated. The challenge now was integrating this new understanding into the facility's operational structure while respecting her personal boundaries. As the formal session concluded, individual team members approached Thompson with personal acknowledgments of her performance and questions about her background. The dynamics of respect and curiosity that characterized interactions among military professionals were evident in these conversations. Mitchell was particularly interested in her specific training and experience. Thompson, the precision you demonstrated today, was that typical for designated marksmen in the 75th, or were you exceptional even within that unit? The question reflected professional curiosity about elite military capabilities, and Thompson's response provided insight into the standards of truly exceptional organizations. The 75th maintains high standards, she replied diplomatically. Everyone is expected to perform at levels that might seem exceptional in other contexts. The modest deflection was characteristic of elite military personnel, who often understated their individual capabilities while emphasizing unit standards and team performance. However, those familiar with such organizations understood that being selected as a designated marksman within the Rangers represented extraordinary individual ability. 3 weeks after the rescue operation, life at the Cascade Mountain facility had settled into new patterns that reflected the changed understanding of Marianne Thompson's background and capabilities. The dramatic revelation of her military service had created ripples throughout the organization, but she had maintained her preference for quiet support roles. Despite multiple offers for increased responsibilities, the rescued researchers had made full recoveries, their grateful family sending letters of appreciation that Harrison had shared with the entire rescue team. The local media had covered the story as a successful multi-agency operation, though the specific details of Thompson's critical contributions had been kept within professional circles to respect her privacy preferences. The tactical rangers who had witnessed her performance had returned to their home assignments, but word of the exceptional marksmanship demonstration had spread through law enforcement and military networks. Thompson's name was beginning to circulate among professionals who appreciated extraordinary shooting skills, though she remained unaware of her growing reputation. At the facility, the daily routines had resumed with subtle but significant changes. The equipment coordination role remained Thompson's primary responsibility, but her interactions with trainees and instructors now carried the weight of acknowledged expertise. Personnel who had previously seen her as helpful support staff now recognized her as someone whose quiet competence masked exceptional capabilities. The most significant change was in the attitude of the tactical training instructors, who had begun informally consulting Thompson on equipment selection and maintenance issues that affected marksmanship performance. Her insights into the technical aspects of precision shooting were proving valuable for improving training outcomes, even though she maintained her preference for advisory rather than instructional roles. Captain Harrison had respected Thompson's declination of expanded responsibilities, but he had also found subtle ways to utilize her expertise within her comfort zone. Equipment procurement decisions now included her technical input, and advanced training programs benefited from her knowledge of specialized gear requirements. The relationship between Thompson and the facility's regular training personnel had evolved into one of mutual respect and understanding. The tactical rangers who rotated through the facility for advanced training were often briefed on her background, creating an atmosphere where her expertise was acknowledged without pressure for her to assume high-profile roles. Richardson had returned for follow-up training, his confidence in precision shooting gradually rebuilding through focused practice and technical instruction. During his second visit, he had approached Thompson for advice on overcoming psychological barriers to long-distance accuracy. The harder you try to replicate someone else's technique, the more you interfere with your own natural abilities, Thompson had advised during one of their informal conversations. Trust your training, read the conditions, and let the shot happen naturally. The guidance was technically sound and psychologically astute, helping Richardson understand that his struggles had been caused by overthinking rather than lack of ability. His subsequent improvement had been steady and confidence-building, demonstrating the value of Thompson's teaching instincts, even when applied informally. Dr. Coleman had continued to observe Thompson's adjustment to her partially revealed status, noting that the recognition of her capabilities had actually contributed to her psychological well-being rather than creating additional stress. The respect she now received from colleagues seemed to have filled a need for professional acknowledgement that had been missing during her 3 years of complete anonymity. She's finding a balance between utilizing her expertise and maintaining emotional boundaries, Coleman had reported to Harrison during one of their regular personnel discussions. The advisory role allows her to contribute meaningfully without assuming the command responsibilities that caused her to leave military service. The assessment reflected Coleman's understanding that Thompson's career choices were based on self-awareness and psychological needs rather than fear or inadequacy. Her performance during the rescue had demonstrated that her capabilities remained intact, but her preferences for support roles reflected mature recognition of what contributed to her long-term well-being. The morning routine that had characterized Thompson's first 3 years at the facility continued largely unchanged. She still arrived early, maintained meticulous equipment records, and worked with quiet efficiency that supported the facility's training mission. However, the interactions throughout her day now included the informal consultations and respectful acknowledgments that reflected her colleagues' understanding of her background. The walking cane that had once marked her as someone outside the competitive sphere of tactical excellence was now understood as a reminder of service-connected injury rather than general limitation. The careful pace that others had interpreted as physical caution was recognized as the deliberate movement of someone trained to be constantly aware of her surroundings. Most significantly, the assumptions about capability based on appearance had been permanently altered for everyone who had witnessed her performance. The quiet woman with graying hair and practical clothes was now known to possess skills that few people in the world could match, creating a new awareness of the potential that might be hidden within any seemingly ordinary individual. The tactical ranges where Thompson's dramatic shooting demonstration had occurred were now associated with that extraordinary performance, though she rarely visited them except for equipment maintenance purposes. The 500-meter targets that had challenged experienced rangers seemed less intimidating to trainees, who understood that true mastery was possible with proper training and dedication. New groups of tactical rangers continued to cycle through the Kofeu facility for advanced training, and their introduction to Thompson had become part of the orientation process. The knowledge that exceptional capabilities might be found in unexpected places had become a valuable lesson that extended beyond marksmanship to broader understanding of human potential. The small wooden box in Thompson's dresser had been joined by new items, letters of appreciation from the rescued researchers' families, a formal commendation from the county search and rescue coordinator, and a photograph from the rescue operation that showed her in action during the critical moments that had saved lives. These additions represented recognition of her continued service and capability, but they were stored alongside the earlier mementos rather than displayed prominently. Thompson's preference for quiet contribution over public recognition remained unchanged, even as her demonstrated abilities had earned the respect of professional colleagues. The forest path between her cabin and the main facility remained her favorite part of each day, providing time for reflection and connection with the natural environment that had drawn her to the mountain assignment. The sounds of training activities from the ranges now carried different associations, not the pressure to perform that had characterized her military service, but the satisfaction of supporting others' development and growth. As autumn deepened into winter, the facility's training schedule adapted to seasonal conditions that required different skills and equipment. Thompson's role in supporting these adaptations had expanded naturally, her expertise contributing to decisions about cold weather gear, modified training protocols, and safety procedures for winter operations. The revelation of her background had not fundamentally changed her daily life or responsibilities, but it had created an environment where her contributions were properly valued and her expertise could be utilized appropriately. The balance between recognition and privacy that she had achieved represented a successful integration of her military experience with her civilian career goals. Standing at her cabin window one evening, watching snow begin to fall across the mountain landscape, Thompson reflected on the unexpected turn her carefully planned anonymity had taken. The rescue operation had revealed capabilities she had intended to keep hidden, but the outcome had been positive in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her skills had saved lives, her experience had contributed to successful training outcomes, and her presence at the facility had gained new meaning and purpose. Most importantly, she had discovered that contributing to others' success could provide satisfaction without the psychological burden of command responsibility that had driven her from military service. The walking cane leaning against her nightstand remained a functional necessity, but it no longer represented the complete truth about her capabilities. The careful anonymity she had maintained for 3 years had evolved into selective disclosure that allowed her to contribute meaningfully while maintaining the personal boundaries that supported her well-being. Outside her window, the snow continued to fall, covering the facility in the clean silence of winter. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but they would be met with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her proper place supporting others' excellence while maintaining her own integrity and peace of mind. The laughter that had once greeted her walk-in cane belonged to a different time, when appearances had masked reality and assumptions had prevented recognition of true capability. Now respect had replaced dismissal, and understanding had replaced assumptions, creating an environment where quiet strength could be appreciated for what it truly represented. In the end, the most profound victory was not the dramatic demonstration of exceptional skill, but the achievement of a life that honored both service and personal needs, contribution and boundaries, capability and wisdom. The woman who had once split a colonel's coin in midair had found an even more important target, a sustainable way to serve others while serving herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.